So we'll be talking about CORS today, and we'll also be talking about pre-flight requests. What are pre-flight requests? How do they work with CORS? And how do headers work with CORS? And how can we debug CORS perfectly, or we can say efficiently? And we'll be following an application which is built with multi-tenancy architecture here, but the course concept remains the same for every scenario, right? We'll just be using multi-tenancy architecture simulation for this application that we are going to work with today. So let's move towards the application that we are having. This is the setup. The whole setup lies in program.cs file. And here, if I run the application and show you the API doc with Swagger, we have two APIs, and we have to provide bearer token here and tenant value. To get the token, bearer token, we have to use this login API, which requires the tenant value. And then after that, for all the other APIs, for our case here, we only have one API. This API requires the bearer token and the tenant value, both the things. And we'll be using this API with a front-end application, which is hosted on my local host. This is the application, and if I click go live here, so just give me a moment. Here my HTML is live, and this is the application which just accepts tenant value, username, and password. And then this already has the base URL for the API. This has the endpoint right here for the login API. And as we saw, this is a post API. So the method would be post. And then here comes the header part. This is very important. So when I run my application, you can see the console right here. And you can see the response header is being logged. This is due to the middleware that I have added right here. Let me show it to you here. So this is only going to be logged when a pre-flight request comes in. So if you ask what are pre-flight requests, if we go inside, see, we already have a multi-tenant application setup. This is just a simulation of a multi-tenant application. We don't have any use of databases for now, but the authentication and API consumption part covers all the scenarios here. Even if you are going to use a full-fledged multi-tenant application or any type of application which includes multi-tenant applications, this setup is going to work fine. So our API supports multiple tenants, and for here our application just has two tenants, which is the first one is tenant A and the second one would be tenant B. And then the front end is hosted on a different origin. As you can see, our Swagger is on 7150, but our front end application is on localhost 5500. This is run using live server via VS Code. So, so this is a simulated app with multi-tenancy architecture. And then moving forward, let's try to understand what pre-flight requests are. So the CORS basically adds security to web applications, and the pre-flight request, if we try to understand, let's move towards the front-end application. Go to the network tab. See, here the code we have directly when I hit on the login button right here, the event listener gets activated and it sends all the values to this endpoint. Here is the username and password, which is sent in the body, and the headers contain content type application JSON and the tenant value here. with the header value set from here, which I have populated in the front end, which is tenant A. Even the tenant B works because we only have two tenants for now. So when I try to send the request, when I hit on the login button, the API goes to the API hits right here. So if we try to monitor this using the network tab, let me hit the login button. Wait, let me reconfigure the CORS right here. Let me change the origin. Uh, just a second. This is allow any origin, right? If I comment this out and change the origin to something like, let's say, which isn't valid, maybe 5560, and then I stop the application, run it again. Let's wait for it to run. Let's try to monitor the API requests. Let's go to the network tab and hit the login button. See, we see two requests here. The first one would be your pre-flight requests. This is what I was talking about. This is the URL, and this is the request method. It would be options, and then the scheme would be HTTPS, and the local host is 7150, which is the URL given right here, this one. Basically, my front end is trying to reach out to this URL with the pre-flight request. And then, though it did not get the exact status code that it was expecting, if you see here, it is getting a CORS issue. And there is no response for the pre-flight. No response for the API request as well. And then the request, yeah, the request URL would be this, and then the referrer policy is strict origin when cross origin. And you can see here we have also got an error in the console, which is that it says access to fetch at this from origin 5500 localhost has been blocked by CORS policy. Response to pre-flight request doesn't pass access control check. No access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. And at the same time, if we try to check the console, this has been logged. This is for the exact pre-flight request that we were checking right here. So the options include request for this is till this it is hard coded. The options include API auth login. This is the endpoint. This is the origin, and then the headers include content type and tenant. By seeing this, you should be sure that for accessing the API on this endpoint, you need to provide two headers. One is content type and another is tenant. And the API method would be post here. The console is configured, the logs that you see is configured right here. This is basically a middleware which has been used right after the application is built. And this is only triggered when the pre-flight request comes in, right? If the HTTP method contains the options like you see here, then only it comes here and logs all the pre-flight options and origin, then the headers and the method that you see right here. And now we are sure that we need to send content type and tenant for this particular endpoint. So now if we just before let's just change the policy. I'll just comment this out. That is done. Shift F5 and then F5 again. So the pre-flight request told me that I need to send two header values. One is the content type and another is tenant, which is being done here, right? Let's send the request and test it. Here, if I F12 and then go to the network tab again, hit login, see, the pre-flight request passed, right? Wait, yeah, strict origin when cross origin. And here we get a 200. Here we get a response. This is the login API. So this is the first pre-flight request. This is from top to bottom, right? So for top to bottom, this is the pre-flight before the login API request. So I'm sorry. Yeah, this is the first pre-flight request, and then this is the request header for the pre-flight request. Same localhost. This is the post method, and then content type and tenant is required. So if we try to see the login API, yeah, see, this is giving you the token and tenant. This is giving you the token, which again we need to use to access all the users, or maybe you can say the user API. And the same process needs to be followed for all the other APIs that are there, which require the token and the tenant value. If we try to see the code here, see, after it gets the response, here it gets the token and then it prints on the front end. Then it calls the users API. Same base URL and then the users API with two headers again, authorization and tenant with bearer token and tenant value. This process is going to be followed for all other APIs which accept authorization with bearer token and tenant. And if you see the logs here, this is for the pre-flight, right? The content type and tenant. And again, after the pre-flight is passed, if it sees that yes, the origin is allowed, see, this says the access control allow origin star. This means this is a wildcard entry. This says that all the requests are valid. It doesn't matter from which domain you are initiating the request. It's valid as long as you configure it as a wildcard entry. Then login attempt with these credentials and tenant header would be tenant A, login success, response headers, and then again a pre-flight request. After the login is verified, then we have configured it to send another API request to get the user data. So here goes the pre-flight again for user data. The pre-flight basically is sent before each API request. So it isn't like the pre-flight only goes there once, and if it is verified, all the other APIs would work without sending pre-flight requests. So again, the pre-flight is sent, and this says you just need authorization and tenant. The pre-flight is sent for API and users. So the pre-flight was first sent for API auth login endpoint, and then again it was sent for API users. This endpoint now requires two header values. One is authorization, would this would be for the bearer token, and then another would be the tenant value. Whereas this did not require the bearer token. You got the bearer token using the login API, and then here the bearer token is required and the tenant value is required. This is a get API, and the origin is a wildcard entry, so all the origins can pass through. And again, the API is called the JWT tenant claim. Here it specifies that the tenant was tenant A, and then the user API success for user allies in tenant A. If I would have sent tenant B, then you would have saw tenant B all over here. Tenant B, and tenant B. I only have two tenants configured here, but we can configure as many as we want. So yeah, this was an overview of the CORS and pre-flight requests and all. So we also saw logging pre-flight requests. We saw how we can log pre-flight requests. You can just, if you're using a .NET application, you're working in a .NET application, you can just add this middleware after your app is being built so that you see all the requests that come through. And if I just show you, where did that go? Here it is. After the app is being built, you can just add this middleware which would log all the things if the pre-flight requests comes in. And then the console logs show crucial pre-flight details. This is what I was talking about. And then origin and request headers are visible, which we saw in the logs right here. Missing CORS headers block the requests, obviously. So we need to make sure that the CORS headers are available so the request isn't blocked. And we also saw how we can use the network tab, which displays the pre-flight requests. So you can always debug using the network tab right here. Before the API request, you will always be finding a pre-flight request for that particular API you are uh, trying to hit. And the successful pre-flight enables the actual request. So if the pre-flight request for that particular API request is successful, then the API is going to hit without any issue. And if it is failed, then it's going to block your API call, and you are going to get CORS policy console, CORS policy log in your console in the front end application. So what are our takeaway? We need to configure CORS with origins and headers. See, we can also configure our CORS like this. If I just try to show you, yeah, this one with headers, content type, authorization, and tenant. Uh, the syntax, how this works is we can configure multiple headers right here. It doesn't matter if only one is being used, but if I have multiple headers written here, then all the three is going to work. Even if like this login API required only two headers, right? Content type and tenant. But here, if content type, tenant, and authorization is written, it doesn't work like it doesn't require all the three of this header values to be present here. If three are allowed, then even if one is required, it's fine. So you can add multiple headers here so that all the header values in your API that are required is covered. So like if you have like 5 to 6 headers configured in all of your APIs, if you have like 50 or 200 APIs and there are multiple headers covered in your APIs, you can add all the headers here. It doesn't matter if your if a single API requires a single header, but the header should be covered here if you want to keep the headers specific. Or if you want all the headers to be allowed, then you can go with allow any header. And the same goes with origin. You can allow origin with this syntax. You can give comma separated values here, and you can allow specific origins. And let me say if you are using cookies instead of a JWT or anything, then you will have to go with this allow credentials. And then if you use allow credentials, you cannot do allow any origin, or you cannot even do this allow with origin with a wildcard entry. You cannot even do this. You have to specify origin. It requires origin to be specified. You can specify more than one origin, but at least one origin is required here if you are going to use allow credentials here. And you only use allow credentials when you are going to use cookies or anything for the authentication or any purpose. So yeah, this was it. Let's meet again with some other topic, some other day. Thank you.